We are resuming our work and we are starting our new session. It's my pleasure to pass the floor on to our moderator, Ina Berezkina, who is a program director at the School of Civic Education. Many thanks, Sergey, and many thanks to Sergey and Boris for their trust, for their confidence. I didn't expect to be so lonely in this chair. It's a great honor to me to moderate this session. I have brilliant panelists next to me. I want to repeat this. This session is organized, is held jointly in collaboration with the German Sacharow Society, and together with our organizer. This session actually is an organic continuation of the theme that we have started discussing this morning. Our speakers this morning are Lev Gudkov and Andreas Heinemann-Grüder. Lev Gudkov is a research director at Levada Center, and he is a person, thanks to whose works, that we have some sort of background allowing us to reflect upon the inheritance or the heritage of the Soviet social medium. And Andreas is a professor of political science at the University of Bonn and research fellow at many research centers such as Global Public Policy Institute and others. We have not met with Andres yet, so it's my pleasure to get acquainted with you. So we will speak.
Shall I switch to English when I speak to you?
I will continue in Russian since it's simultaneous interpretation. Andreas is the author of many works and many publications dealing with the issues of the conflict societies, of the wartime sociality, the human rights, and Andreas consults on the issues of strategic relations with Russia and the countries of the Eastern Partnership. We will talk about the identity, national identity, the wartime and international relations. I will ask, I will forward asking a preliminary question. The friends and the adversaries of Russia, the first evaluation will be quite obvious given the works by Carl Schmitt and Hobbes and Karl Popper. But my question will rather be the following. We all realize that the situation where the assessment of the large groups which define the dichotomy and adversary and friend is not a new situation, is not a new context. How classical the situation in Russia is as an example of binarity. As I'm asking this question, I sort of realize that it sounds like if we were a unique society, it is exactly the contrary. Maybe this particular case doesn't have a precedent, a historical precedent, but the human being is not a unique creature, and I want to just figure out, better understand today how bad things are. As I was preparing myself, I looked at my notes of 2018, and I'm your loyal participant and spectator. And at that time, you mentioned that the Russian society is marked by two processes. One being the return of totalitarianism, which will last for decades, and the second process is under larger tension and shorter, and it is the return of the reverse totalitarianism. And you have a book about it. If we look at this line of events, where are we on this line? Maybe you will touch upon that in your presentation. So it's my pleasure to pass the floor on to you, and then of course we will listen to Andreas and we will be able to answer everybody's questions. Carl Schmitt is present here in our analysis and as a source. What I'm going to say is based on our studies, with the studies that we have been conducting for more than 35 years. I'm quite resistant to the talks that everything has changed dramatically back in February 22. What we have seen as a pattern over the last several years the witnesses to the fact that a number of precursor signs have emerged much earlier down that line, and everybody was saying that you shouldn't be frightening us, you shouldn't intimidate us. What we can say about the current status of the Russian society, given the wartime circumstances. The indicators of support to the war have not changed over the last 4 years. 78% support the military action, and around 17% are against. There is a certain degree of fatigue following 3 years of the war. The last 3 years, the ratio between those who support and those who want to stop would be rather 1 to 2, to 30% for the continuation of wars, 62-64% are against. But when being asked the question, what should the ceasefire talks focus upon, the most respondents reply that the negotiations can only be about the capitulation of Ukraine, or defeat of Ukraine. In the situation when we ask if the Putin will decide to put an end to the war and withdraw the troops, would you approve his actions, his deeds? 80% would approve, but if it would mean the returning the occupied territories to Ukraine, then the ratio of those who agree and don't agree reverse, and those who condemn such the decision rises up to 60%, with the following ensuing the lowering of Putin's rating. So the polls of the wartime period of the years 23-25 show the growth of record subsequent growth of the popularity of the and at the same time of the degree of satisfaction, whether people are happy with their material status, with their accommodation, with their housing, with their health, etc. Those factors of satisfactions show the substantial dwindling. So people are not satisfied at all. Almost 3% of difference, and almost 3% of decrease in the degree of the satisfaction. At the same time, the growth of the patriotic mood.
Please show the second and the 8th slide. Oh, please, the first one. Do you like the life you conduct? The blue line is growing, and now it has achieved the maximum for the last period. The next, please. It increased. So the feeling of pride has increased during the last 30 years. And the shame and non-satisfaction decreased. Also, some typical questions from our survey about the feelings. It's a projection, of course, a projective measurement. This is the picture, the growth, significant growth during the war. growth of satisfaction, of pride. Generally speaking, the growth of the power support was notified at all stages of every war, at the beginning of the Georgia War, at the beginning of the Chechen War, after the Crimea annexion. It provides the consolidation of the citizens around the power. It is really very important. Since 2009, please, the slide number 12. No. Please go back to the slide before. Yes. You see the decrease in the last 30 years, the condition of non-satisfaction. The situation of the 90s is the ground base for the current situation. At the same time, we see the growth of the feeling that we're better. It would be better if the world would be similar to our world. It is related to the war actions, not only with propaganda, with the overall reanimation, restoration of the Soviet identity. Since 2009, we know the enemies of our country, different ones, CIA, terrorists, however, this year, so we have up to 92% of people who see it in this way. No, please proceed. So the next one, the next, yes. No, please stop here about the enemies. There you see a significant growth is after the Putin coming back into power. The image of an enemy becomes very significant mechanism at that time of the collective identity, of the consolidation of the society. And it does not decrease during all the years with maybe some ups and downs, 2012, 2013, as there were a crisis and some mass protests, and during the pandemic. But all the other time there is a stable growth, and this is a fundament for the current, for the mass support. Now, please go some slides back. At the same time, the enemy images can be explained like mechanism of consolidation. They're kept all over the time. 2003 to 2025. So in the first years, the enemies are the Baltic countries, which became the member of the EU, the Eastern European countries, most of all Poland, and Ukraine and Georgia. They are enemies because of threat of revolution. 2007, after the speech of Putin in Munich, So there is a new law adopted about foreign agents. Anti-Western course of the Russian politics becomes the main one. The annexion of Crimea is also very important. Then the attitude towards other countries is changing too. So as an enemy image, current enemies are the United States, Germany, Great Britain, Poland, partly Baltic countries. These are the yesterday values, the models of visual achievements, targets. So it was what we had in the first years of Perestroika in the 90s till the end of the 90s. So there was no enemy feelings towards these countries, maybe only some conservative circles, so among communists maybe. But in general, there was no enemy feeling. The attitude towards Ukraine is different as to against Germany or US. Ukraine Ukraine is not a subject. That's why this enemy feeling is quite weak. The liability for this war after the Crimea is, first of all, lies on the NATO, not Ukraine, on Europe in general. And the Russian government is not liable for it at all. Only 3 to 8% thinks that Russia is guilty in on this war. This is also the share of Russians who feels liable and guilty for and shameful for what is happening there. The friends are those countries, new ones. Except with the exception of Belarus. So there were no friends before. Only after the growing isolation, new frames came on stage. And this is a condition of exiting the isolation, escaping the isolation. And that's why Russia thinks itself in the camp of those who oppose the hegemony of the US. So they're a bit, so this a bit suspicious attitude towards China is changing now, is strengthening during the war now. In the last months, there is more sympathy towards North Korea, and now it is more or less at the same level. These are the new allies. I would like to underline all these images are like a projection, they are not real, and all these compositions is matching the deep cultural structure of the society. And this goes in parallel with an ongoing conflict of attempt to modernize the country, the same as other European or Western countries. So just to become a normal country is kind of utopia. The bad, so the non-successful reforms even strengthened this feeling of collective identity, and it just was transformed into a kind of envy. We can remember all the Soviet complexes. So as we spoke, we Soviet people, we have our own pride. But there is an evolution of an inner conflict. And it expresses into transferring these aggressive attitudes to their outer factors like successful West. And in this sense, the war is a legitimate continuation of the inner development of all these feelings. The Russian regime has just one target: to keep its power, its legitimation, suppressed the ability of the society to have a political will. And so for all the things which could be significant for Russians, so just safety in the future and welfare and all these things, and all they're thinking now about is these ideas of the past, forcing any kind of inner and outer threats to the population. They demand self-sacrificing consolidation and supporting of this regime. And they, in fact, destroy the values like order, like wealth, like all what the people want. If the values they normally just declare to be their own.
Дорогой Лев, я только напоминаю, что мы приближаемся к лимиту времени.
Just you have your limit of the time. You have exceeded your limit of the time. Just watch out the time. Together with the growth of pride and satisfaction, there is also growth of the security agencies, totalitarian leader, army, FSB, police, and so on. Why? Because these institutions are gatekeepers of this new culture, of this extreme culture, of empire structure. And they were reactivated after the crisis of the totalitarian state in the 90s. How much time do I have? Unfortunately, no time. You've exceeded the time, just maybe 2-3 minutes. Since 2000 and after Putin came into power, so the expectations are becoming lower. The main reason of the collective neurosis, there is an inner stress which goes hand in hand with the growth of the life quality. But there was no miracle. This is a kind of an age of mass ressentiments. And since that moment, all the signs of the totalitarian regime are there. So no liability, mistrust to Western sources of information, and the need for a strong leader who could protect. And idealization, self-praise is parallel with violence and distribution of violence, spread of violence. And violence against a potential enemy who is hated. And the respondents, they think that Russia is always an enemy for other countries. No one wishes anything good for Russia. They are despising us. They want to humiliate. They want to humiliate us. And then maybe we need a kind of enforcement towards others, that they recognize how magnifique we are. This is a kind of neurosis, and the sense of this needs, it's a feeling to defeat other, to be over the others, just to shame them, to humiliate them. And we just see this effect in the last years of the war. Thank you. Thank you. We have a first question. Nikolai Plotnikov, sitting in the center. Lev Dmitrievich, good afternoon. I'm glad to see you here. I have two questions. The first one related to the term you introduced, negative identity, in your book 2004, and you defined the Russian identity like a combination of this non-satisfaction and seeking for enemies, seeking for outer enemy. Now, can we still use this concept for the current situation? If not, how should we correct this term? Is there still this negative identity? This is the first question. The second question related to the identity during the whole post-Soviet period, that there are two concepts about collective identity, Russian collective identity, the Russian people like a political identity, which foresees a kind of multinationalism, political society. Even Shoigu just remembered some time ago that Russia is a multinational state. But on the other side, this concept of Russia as a state of Russians, of Russian ethnicity, and so maybe this is kind of this anti-migration policy and so on. Support of this Russian nationalism. According to your data, are there any indications in which direction Russia goes with both two concepts of identity? So is there a more one above another? The first, I think that this idea of negative identity as a structure of Russian culture is still very relevant, is kept all over the time. So our surveys show that it's still viable. The problem is their self-dignity, the values of Russian cannot be expressed positively. That's why they need an enemy, an opponent, opposer, and only in comparing one with another we can speak about ourselves. All the descriptions of ethnical identity or any other kind of identity, they are empty if there is no imaginated enemy. The pantheon of our greatest persons are the strong leaders, tsars, and so on, struggling for us. If you take this away, then you have a kind of amorphic self-imagination. There is no a collective we. Only if you struggle against an outer enemy, then there are us. This is the self-identity, self-consciousness of Russians. The second question about Russians, state of Russians or not. In Russia, there is no idea of political nation because there is no civil society. I don't agree with Andrei Kolesnikov because the civil society appeared historically as a protest against the power. It was always self-organized and struggle against their power. If there is no such thing, then we cannot speak about it. So there is no political nation. There is an empire consciousness, empire identity. And the empire, this is the empire of Russians. And they are more and more anti-Western views, xenophobia. So, and This is their identity. Those Russian are special people. They have special rights. They're better than other nations, and they have to be respected and recognized. All the others, all these talks about multinationalism, it means that they're just, they are there, but they're just in second place. They are just not in the first row.
Спасибо большое. У нас есть еще один вопрос.
Thank you very much. We have another question.
Сергей, потом тогда передайте.
Да, конечно. Лев Дмитриевич, большое спасибо за ваше
Thank
выступление.
you very much for your presentation. Yesterday, it's another session. Alexander Balmer said that from the point of view of those people who make political decisions in Russia, they have a kind of mistrust, they lack of legal legitimation, and the only legitimation they recognize is the legitimation of force. Is this overall national idea? Is this idea, did this idea penetrate the society? Their to current power, they don't have a political, they have a political police with extra powers, extraordinary powers, and so like KGB, they have more rights than the law, so they act outside the law, beneath the law, beneath the legal frames. That's why the idea of force, of violence, of enforcement. Yes, I agree. Yes, he's right.
Спасибо. У нас есть еще один вопрос.
Thank you. We have one more question. Thank you very much. My name is Roman Smernov. I work at the Leibniz Institute. I was scientific employee. Could you tell something more about neurosis? If you have neurosis, it can become pathologic. Is there a kind of nutrition, maybe this rate of non-satisfaction? Can we assume that the neurosis of some values and views has a dynamics of strengthening of those anti-Western views and anti-identical views? Yes, this mechanism of growth of stress, yes, what we call neurosis, yes. Yes, you know, this is when the level of willing anything is growing faster than the possibility to get what you wish, and then you get this situation of frustration and what the psychologists and sociologists call the deprivation, and against the groups which seem to get any positions in an unfair way. This neurosis was strengthened by the end of the 90s and converted against the reformers. The preconditions of that development was that what we had in the Soviet times was characterized by the low level of social differentiation, and this significant changes, those economical reforms, they gave a push to this split between what the people wanted and what they could get. After Putin came, he just lowered the level of requirements. So he gave a kind of relative stability, and but also it lowered so this split between what they wanted and what they could get. But aggression is still in place, is kept, and will develop even further. But only in the situation where we see the split between the expectation and their abilities.
Спасибо большое. Мы успеем еще один короткий вопрос. Простите, что не все
Just one short question.
Вопросы. Сохраните их до конца сессии. Мы к вам вернемся.
Спасибо. Всеволод Бедерсон, Леонид Дмитриевич, спасибо большое, очень любопытно.
Thank you very much.
Что оценивают Северную Корею, да, там.
You show that there is a growth of respecting of North Korea or Belarus, but we also see that there is also a wish to cancel the sanctions, to just restore the relationship with Europe. There is no kind of ambivalence, ambiguity in this? North Korea and Iran and so on, they will, of course, disappear as soon as they came. It's because of hopelessness. It's more, they're not friends, they're more allies, but not friends. They're in this concrete situation, yes. It is also important without China, North Korea, and Iran. So this policy of the Russian government is not possible as it is.
So the absence of criticism on the part of North Korea or Iran or China makes them the friends of Russia. It's the any critical attitude that converts an identity into an enemy, into an adversary. This is something that happened to the countries that represented some sort of ideal, more contemporary ideal of the quiet and calm. The Scandinavian, the Nordic countries, Finland and Sweden, after having joined NATO, the adversity on the part of the Russian citizens has increased, although they're still not quite considered as a military threat or as military adversaries. Many thanks, Andreas. And now we're passing on to your presentation on the friends and enemy of Russia, collective identity during the special military operation. I think that manipulation is a sort of a flavor of the age. And since we are in Germany, I cannot help drawing a parallel as far as the relations with Germany is concerned, the interference of Russia and a year ago, a book was published in which this process was highlighted widely, and where it was mentioned that until the Stasi archives were opened and other European archives, we have been very little aware of the amplitude of the degree of this interference of Russia in Germany. At the same time, he mentioned that the wide society, the wide the community has not been discussing it. Since we are talking about the identity of the Russian society, and it's just been said that identity often starts somewhere else, departs from the external world. Would you agree with the statement that Germany within this picture, against this background, is the most important strategic target of the Russian disintegration and Russian attempts to interfere with German policies.
Мы вас не слышим.
Your microphone, please. The microphone.
So should I immediately answer to this question, or should I start with the presentation?
If you could, yeah, please do start with your presentation, but if you could cover that when you answer.
I will do that too. I will do that, come to that in the end. Thanks very much for the invitation. I was asked to give my presentation in English otherwise, but I can also answer in Russian later and understand Russia. I'm, of course, here an outsider, and I'm humbled by the expertise on Russian identity. So what I'm suggesting is here some propositions on political survival of the Russian political regime. And we are somehow under the impression that highly consolidated political regime in Russia, and maybe the next slide is a remark about the dynamics of the Russian regime. So we see over the years that Russia has moved from electoral authoritarianism to a closed autocracy, from a minimum coalition around the Silo-archics or the Siloviki. It has to broaden its winning coalition to a patrimonial war coalition. We see the movement from a petro-state to the preference for the military-industrial complex. We see also the use of limited war to an absolute war in the sense of Clausewitz. We also see that in the past, the de facto regimes in the post-Soviet sphere were used as leverage for destabilizing and influencing neighboring countries, and now they move to a final solution. We also see that in the past, Europe, one would try to get Europe on one side against the United States, but now it's reversed with the United States against Europe. And then one sees also that from post-Soviet hegemony to a kind of imperial overstretch. The question that occurs is whether the Putinist social contract is still valid, or whether under the impact of war, this social contract that lasted for roughly 20 years is under threat. Next slide, maybe. I think that apart from what Lev Gudkov has said, we have also to look at the legitimization of the regime through the soft power that is projected outside. And this is mostly about, the clash of civilizations, which is naturalized and essentialized. And here Russia sees itself with the global majority in a fight against decolonization. On the other hand, it is also in contradiction to that, in a kind of, imperial alliance, or sees itself in a kind of imperial alliance with the United States and with China, which is in opposition to this anti-colonialist rhetoric. I think the soft power of Russia is basically in exploiting the mismatch between capitalism and democracy in developed capitalist countries. And so it's basically exploiting the impression, is this already a democracy, or is it getting even worse? Next slide. We have heard about, the specifics of Russian legitimizations of its culture of violence, but at a closer look, one can see that Russia actually exploits certain universal myths, certain universal patterns with certain specifics, but in the end, It's, a menu which is used throughout the world. It's a kind of passepartout for war legitimization, and the mechanisms are not very specific to Russia. The one is, about the divine origin, God is with us, then also that one has to preserve the purity of one's own nation or one's own group, that the others are barbaric and inferior, and that one is encircled, there's a conspiracy against oneself, that one has a God-chosen leader, a messiah, Putin as a messiah, then also the, holy masses, the cult of the holy masses of the people, then also that the state is somehow a continuity since ancient times, then the holy sacrifices of the past, they are a command for present times, then also the victimhood of the past, especially during World War II, is proof of the sanctity of one's own cause. And then also that one was peaceful in the past, but it was never appreciated. Next slide. I think if we look at Russian perceptions of itself, of course, it sees itself mainly as a sole moral inheritor of World War II, also as a standard bearer of traditional values against, a Europe, Western Europe in decline. It sees itself also as a kind of master race or big brother in the succession of all Russian empires and the Soviet Empire. It needs to restore its status. It has also this image that truth is what's instrumental, so there is no eternal truth, but the truth is what helps, what can be exploited. One sees itself also as a kind of community of warriors, and Russia could be defined as Putin once did it, as the combination of orthodoxy and the atomic bomb. If one looks at the others, there are maybe various different others. There's the collective West, then there are the brothers in arms, then there are some powers one has to reckon with, then one has useful idiots in Western countries, and then maybe one has to play also to audiences. Next slide. The question that is of interest is why are certain narratives sticky? Why do they stick? Next slide, please. And I think there are 4 different general approaches to why narrative sticks. The one is populism theories that basically claim, they stick because there's this promise of empowerment. You are empowered if you believe in the story, and you were helpless and I empower you. The second is about recognition. It's about shifting this shame-pride balance. People were maybe in the 1990s ashamed, and now they can feel pride, and Lev Gudkov he spoke about that. Then there's this congruent theory about revival of the Homo Sovieticus, of the old patterns, and then there's a fourth approach that asks how diffuse or generalized specific is support, and if one follows here Lev Gudkov, one could subscribe to the view that the legitimization of the war is diffuse. It's not instrumental. It's not opportunistic. It's not specific, but it is generalized. But it is in the end a little bit up to question if Russia would not win. How diffuse would the support be? Then the next question is, next slide. Why are passions mobilized? So why do certain narratives get heated up? And there are several explanations for that. And one is, the transformation fatigue, then also this latent dissatisfaction that was turned around. Lev Gudkov supported that. Then also that closure of social circles, one does not communicate with outsiders anymore. Then also that there's some group formation in social media, that also, the materialist values are pitted against the post-materialist ones. then also that the degree of heat is related to one's status in the social hierarchy. The lower one is maybe the more heat. Then also that it is a reaction to shrinking spaces. And then next slide is about which arenas are maybe the most heated up, the most warmed up, and that the sociologist from Berlin, Mao, he has in an ideal type differentiated between four arenas, and there's this classical top-bottom arena, and one could ask, is this something that mobilizes the Russians? And probably not, because Navalny tried that, we against kleptocracy, but one is under the impression, it's a kleptocratic anyway. So we are kleptocratic, and on top they are also, but this does not work. Then there's this arena, sovereignty arena, outside, inside, it works. So there's a lot of heat. We as the insider against an adversarial outside. Then there's the arena of tradition. We as defenders of tradition against also all these post-materialist values. There seems to be a lot of heat in Russia. So maybe the next slide, because I have here. Okay, and then we have a fourth arena, the past against the future, and Russia is defending the past against all kinds of imperatives of the future. And if I ask myself, where's most of the heat in the Russian narratives, it's probably in the outside inside arena and we versus the others arena. I was also asked then, and I'm coming then already a little bit to the close. Next slide. What is the impact of these norms of violence, of the cultural violence on regime stability? So is there a link between these normative preferences and the survival of the political regime? And of course, the culture of violence is multifunctional, and it demonstrates power, superiority. It's a way of enforcing norms and rules and group mores. It's a way of living out certain images of one's own superiority and the other's inferiority. It's a control mechanism over elite defection and also preventing challengers to come into the arena. It's also about cleansing the body politic. It's about the pooling of resources for the war effort. It's about internal group cohesion. It's about teaching lessons. Next slide. It's also about diffusing risks and insecurities. It's about dealing with a so-called security dilemma. It's maybe also a reaction to desperation, to anger. It's a way of revenge, and it's also a way of collectivizing guilt. So everybody who participated in the war is part and parcel of this collective compromising material. Next slide. We can ask ourselves now, how stable is this, and how consolidated is this interplay between structures and modes of governance and public preferences. The question is, how opportunistic or fundamentalist are the Russians? My thesis would be circumstances changing. Most of the Russians would defect. Maybe 10 to 15% are moral conviction offenders, and the others are opportunists. The second point is, the theory of marginal gains applies to all ideologies and to the Russian world too. So if you introduce an ideology, it may have certain attractiveness, but it has to deliver. And so there are life cycles of certain ideologies, and the life cycle of the Russian world ideology might be also in decline. Then the third point, which has been made by system theory, so the regime dilemmata that led to the end of the Soviet Union applied to the Russia too. And then also that we have here somehow the triumph of the will over the facts of life. And it seems to work to some extent, but in the end, the triumph of the will cannot compensate for the facts of life. Then we have this whole literature Archimolo got the Nobel Prize for about why nations fail, and they apply to Russia's political regime too. If we also, return to the old Talcott Parsons and system theory, we also could say, Russia, as any political regime, any other, has to fulfill certain functions. It has to be able to adapt, to achieve its goal, to integrate and to reproduce latent patterns. And we can ask ourselves whether Russia is able. Obviously, if one follows Lev Gudkov, it is pretty good in latent pattern maintenance, so in the last function. But I ask myself to what extent it is able to fulfill the third three first functions of system theory. And finally, societies and regimes are stable as long as they can offer upward social mobility. And that was the way the Nazi regime was successful. Stalinism was successful. When gerontocracy sets in, regimes become unstable, and that was also a reason for the Arab Spring, and we have to keep that in mind with respect to Russia too. Maybe with respect to the question on Germany, Germany was for Russia the advocate vis-a-vis the European Union and the United States for long. So Russia had always leverage over the policy of the United States to some extent, but especially in the European Union. And there's this disappointment that Germany does no longer play this kind of Rapallo role vis-a-vis the West, and therefore it is, there is some revenge in that. And of course, they all know that, if the right-wing populists win in Germany in 3 years' time, then Germany will become an ally again. So Orban is useful, but not sufficient. If Germany has an Orban-like chancellor, it would be a president like Trump in the United States.
Thank you. Andreas оставил нам щедрые 25 минут на дискуссию.
Andrei has generally left us 20 minutes for a discussion. If there are any questions, please go ahead. But if we could please ask the question to both of our speakers.
Лучше на русском, на английском?
What language should I speak?
Я стараюсь тоже на русском отвечать, если вам легче на русском.
You can speak whatever language you prefer.
Давайте я постараюсь просто объединить вопрос, да, к обоим докладам.
I will try to then merge two questions to both speakers, and this merged question would be to what extent, when we address the social sciences studies applicable to Russia today, we are compelled to analyze not so much the social sciences, but the modalities of using the speech, the modalities of utilizing the speech. Then was the question about divisionism and the question about the criticism of peacefulness. The propaganda criticized the peacefulness, but at the same time it throws in the thesis that the war is very much enforced, forced action and aimed at protecting, defending the peace. Why this illogic character nature of the thesis boils it all down to the fact that it's easier to agree with the thesis as the only adequate participation in discussion is actually abstaining from discussion in Russia nowadays. This is a question to, as far as I understood, to both of our speakers. Maybe Mr. Gudkov first. I don't think it's a serious contradiction. This double reflection mechanism, both work. The fact that the authorities are main communicators. Another thing is that it's important in practical terms than daily behavior. But then everything is secures with both factors, behaviors, and communicative patterns in support of the power. I think that any aggressor wants say that aggression lies with their adversary. Hitler said when the 1st of September 1939 said it was a reaction to Poland's provocation. It was Poland that started. And before that, he often spoke for peace, that he didn't want to break into this new world war, etc. And the Soviet Union was also always for peace. So every aggressor will always start the adversities in the name of peace. So there is no duality about that. I don't see any major contradictions here. Basically, the war is always in the name of peace. I'm afraid, may I just add something to that? Of course, as a matter of fact, this whole problematics fits the argumentation of the explanation of the war between the Soviet Union and Finland in 1939, that little Finland represented a threat to the vast Soviet Union, and that we were compelled, we were bound to defend our borders, to defend Leningrad. These same arguments were repeated back in 1922. The logic underpinning them was exactly the same. Nevertheless, the repetitiveness of the rational doesn't prevent them from being repeated. These arguments are being institutionally reproduced in the teaching process in the schools, and the children are learning it very early in their lives. When we talk about the rationale concerning the winter war with Finland and in the 90s and the first half of the 2000s, the Soviet-Finnish war was perceived as an unjust and unjustified. Today, the tide turned, and all the arguments the reproduction of the Stalin's rationale that we ought to defend ourselves and that we were not the first to attack, this argument to the world are reproduced by today's power in Russia. I'll briefly ask my question and I'll pass the microphone on to the audience to collect the further questions. Andreas mentioned the fact that the Soviet regime neglects the external legitimacy. And I agree with to a certain extent. We see that the Soviet regime is building its own postulates that the God is with us, we are subordinate to some supreme divine nature, but by both direct and indirect signs, we see that sanctions are quite substantial and produce results. And in the 20 points of the plan proposed by Trump recently, we see the points concerning the immunity, meaning that the Russian power is seeking for some sort of external legitimacy. We have a question in the second row, and then to you. Oksana Antonenko, I'm glad to see you here. My question is about the polls that are being conducted now. To what extent they show that in Russia there are no more substantial differences and values and interests between various subgroups within the society. Sometime in the past we spoke about the four Russians: small Russia, big Russia, large cities, southern Caucasus. We talked about major differences between the Russians that were better and more integrated in the world economy, education processes, and those who have never left Russia in their lives. To what extent these polls or any sort of sociological research or breakdown by groups of income, the perception of enemies and the consolidation of the values you have just referred to is specific to all the groups and general to all the groups, or there are some specifics as a function of the group? Maybe we will ask the panelists to answer this question, and we'll pass the microphone to the next member of the audience. Yes, please, Mr. Gudkov. The thing is that there are differences, but these differences between groups are much more diffuse if we compare it with the pre-war period. We can tell about the prominence of the militarist and anti-imperial and imperial position, which is rather less prominent in Moscow. And the province is poorer, is more depressed, and has a different attitude. The dissatisfaction amongst the poor people, among the aged people, is related to the fact that the money should have been better spent not on the war, but rather on the social needs, on the public needs, on the protection of the socially vulnerable groups of population. But this is just an opinion, just a mood. It finds no manifestation in deeds and actions. Any sort of representation with this group is very much oppressed. Moscow is now much more strikingly anti-West and and aggressive towards West.
Andres, maybe you can comment. The Russian elite has suffered and suffers from the status of being expulsed from everywhere like a pariah, that the Nice is closed and Paris is closed for them, that the elites cannot travel as they want. This is a sign of not being recognized, that there is an effect of isolation. And with the end of the war, they want to get their status from before, and all the attempts to agree a ceasefire. This is a struggle for the recognition of their past status First of all, from the US, and expecting that all the others follow the US. That even if the others are not satisfied, but if the US recognizes them, then they will follow. Maybe it will work out, because we never act independently from the US. And they want their status in the G7, so that it will become G8 again, that they are invited, and that Putin will travel across Europe, and they always required this status from themselves. They suffered because a lot of people didn't recognize the status. Because if I'm an emperor of China, and you will look at me and you will think Andreas is a fool, he's not an emperor of China. It depends on recognition. 3.5 years ago, they understood that even the most UN members don't recognize the legitimacy of war. Sometimes has went and they got some legitimation back, but as you know, 1815 at Vienna Congress, this is the ideal of Russia. There are big countries, they decide about the future of the European countries, about so the luck of the European countries, and they just manage all the interests, and they want to come back to this empire condition. And but this is the rhetorics of decolonization. This is only instrumental. If you get an anti-Western support, they don't struggle against imperialism or colonialism. They just want to use this anti-imperialism from the global south. Concerning the second question, the identities, they depend on collective actions, on the ability of collective actions, on communication areas of, there is a kind of homogenization of communication areas where their different opinions can appear. There can be an objective difference between 4 different Russias, but how can it be politicized? The politicization of these differences depends on the space, and there is no space. If there is no possibility of politicization, so it cannot exist objectively. You cannot find the subjective collective expression. One does not exclude another. It depends on the space of the expression to express the objective contradiction or difference. But on my last slide, I showed that I don't think that it exists forever, that this essence exists forever. It depends on war now. The social contract depends on war now. We don't know what follows the war, and all are the hostages of this war. But then they come back to seek for a day where this blackmailing is over. Because now we look at it through the prism of the war. As far as it's over, then it comes maybe back. Thank you. We have a question over there.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon. I have a comment and maybe partly a question. Yesterday, there was a speech by Alexander Morozov. He spoke about the Russian cultural representatives who just spoke against the war or left the country. And it was a big difference between this time and 2014, where they either didn't say anything or just supported Crimea, the actions in Crimea. Related to this, what we see today, the charts of Levada Center, there was quite a curious story. It was not all about the dynamics of relationship with the US. During the last year, out of the main enemy, the US is not an enemy, not the main enemy anymore. Nothing has changed, but the rhetoric has changed. So the military support to Ukraine has continued, all the submarines, all the tests, they have continued. How does it reflect the reality? The colleagues still know the situation at the end of the 80s, because there were already all different sociological surveys. They could not show that this just some months later the regime will collapse, and maybe so all these sociological charts you show, how is it about how it is correlated to the reality? Maybe they just say what you expect from they to say, and would know what the reality is. Maybe they themselves don't know what the reality is. And maybe the same people, just half a year later, are against the war, a supporter of democracy or whatever. Maybe we exaggerate the degree of stability of the regime. I'm sorry, maybe it was too long.
Lev Dmitryevich, Andreas?
Andreas or Lev Dmitryevich? I love the book by Kahneman, Seeking Fast and Seeking Slow. One mechanism of psychological mechanism, which were determined by Tversky and Kahneman, that the awareness functions in comfort zones. Which opinions are comfortable? Which opinions are risky? Which opinions I am in a minority? With which opinion I am in a majority? And then they just estimate the risk of some opinions, and if it's risky to share any opinion, I have to choose. Either I want to be with the majority, with the society, with the many, or I want to pay the price for being alone. The price of loneliness, of truth, is weighted against the risk. And this mechanism works also here, as the perception of the majority and of the minority is balanced, and the zone of comfort is changing too. Lev Dmitryevich? I agree with the previous speaker. This is an old question. How sociological surveys show the reality? I don't want to deepen into this topic. It's a question of faith and of improvements. But where are the factors of radical changes? Just one question. So radical that so significant that the social crisis will be so strong that it will threat the power legitimacy, and there will be or appear some other leaders or some organization which will give other interpretations to understand what is happening. The people themselves. So it's a kind of transfer of its awareness to the mass awareness. They cannot think about what is happening in the country. They don't have any other information besides propaganda, because the mass media, besides the mass media. So there is a need for someone to reinterpret and to make what is happening and to make it available for the mass. The strength of collective imaginations and ideas, where the environment forces them to think so, not other way. This is socially approved and integrated ideas, and it's difficult to avoid them. Either then you are marginalized or you're an outsider, and so on. To speak about reality is possible only if you have a diversity of social positions or social movements which can build any other opinion. Now we cannot speak about this. The cultural clash exists only in the heads of those who are part of this environment. Their impact is really very restricted. Thank you very much. The time has gone. We cannot take any questions. I am really very reliable related to the time. And thank you for the last questions. To see a smile in the face of Lev Dmitrievich is a good thing, because we know the depressivity on the summation of the situation. It's nevertheless, as we discuss a very hot topic, nothing entertaining here. Thank you very much to our experts. Without this deep analysis, without the estimation of the situation, nothing would be possible. Thank you very much for your questions. Now we have a 1 hour break, and thank you very much.